What is up, everyone? This is Ghost Riposte. Welcome to my rankings of the best bosses in Dark Souls 2. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, if I made this list 10 times, I would have come up with 10 different lists. This was super tough due to the sheer total of 41 bosses in Dark Souls 2. I think I got the top 10 and the bottom 10 pretty close, but the 20 in the middle is really anyone's guess. I think you could have a lot of those in any order, to be honest. Like always, I rank the bosses according to 5 categories, those being boss aesthetic and design, arena design, lore, soundtrack, and gameplay mechanics. While this isn't a perfect system, it's good enough to convince myself that these lists aren't just totally made up. Seriously though, I can't believe how many of you have come on board the last couple of weeks. I can't believe there's over 100 of you guys watching these things right now. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but it's pretty crazy to me. And the coolest thing is you guys are all leaving super nice and encouraging comments too. Like, I love the positivity. Let's keep that going. Even people who disagree, they're like, yeah, I don't know about that pick. I might have done this boss instead of that boss, but literally not one person is being like a jerk or anything like that. I love how positive you guys are. So let's seriously keep that going. It's amazing. Anyway, I think a lot of that traffic's coming from the Bloodborne rankings video. So if you guys haven't seen that one, check it out after this. I'll put the link below. I guess with all those new people now, there's pressure to actually make these things decent now that I know you guys are watching. So I'm going to be a little brief with a handful of these bosses. Otherwise, this video would drag on forever, but don't worry, I'll go more in depth on the fan favorites. Without further ado, let's get into it. Number 41, the Covidous Demon. According to the Bone Scythe, which is acquired by swapping the Covidous Demon's soul, that thing that ended up as a monstrous fiend, what was it to begin with? And why did it never leave the queen, meaning Mitha? Perhaps it was entranced by some perversion of love. Number 1, a little mean calling the Covidous Demon it. Number 2, turns out Covidous Demon was the first simp, so yeah. Number 40, Prowling Magus and Congregation. Have you ever thought a great idea for a boss would be to take a noob caster and a bunch of hollows, chuck them into a random room, and put 2 health bars at the bottom of the screen? Yeah, neither have I. Number 39, Dragon Rider. According to the Dragon Rider's soul, the Dragon Riders used to serve in King Vendrick's royal guard long ago. These riders mounted wyverns and caused chaos on the battlefield due to their unparalleled strength. The rank of Dragon Rider was reserved for honorable warriors who helped found Drangleic. Together with the king, they crushed the land's former inhabitants and erected a magnificent kingdom upon their graves. Well, at least the item description is badass. Number 38, Dual Dragon Riders. With these first few bosses, it's gonna come across like I don't like Dark Souls 2, which is far from true. I wouldn't be making this video if that were true. I love Dark Souls 2. That being said, you know what another terrible idea for a boss is? Take one of the existing worst bosses in the game and duplicate him. Again, the idea of a Dragon Rider is badass. It just doesn't come off here. Where is his dragon, by the way? Is it the dragon that's in front of Old Dragon Slayer? Is that supposed to be the dragon he's riding? I realize it predates Dark Souls 3, but maybe something similar to the Nameless King fight would have been cool. Number 37, the Last Giant. Honestly, the Last Giant is quite forgettable, other than the fact he's likely the first boss you'll face. He is the shell of a boss you'll come across later in the game. As the soul item says, many seasons had come and gone, and the giant prepared for his final rest. But his soul remained magnificent, testimony to his former strength. Number 36, Belfry Gargoyles. It's not that this is a bad boss fight, it's just that we've seen it before. It's essentially the same fight as DS1, except with more gargoyles. I didn't hate it, and I didn't love it, it's just kinda there. A nice ode to the past, I suppose, but it seems like something more creative could have been put here. Number 35, Royal Rat Vanguard. I'm going to mention this a few times throughout the video, but one funny thing I noticed in doing research for this video and re-listening to some of the soundtracks is some of the best themes actually belong to some of the worst bosses, ironically. When the boss isn't particularly good, it's hard to separate, but when you listen to the Royal Rat Vanguard's theme, it's actually quite good warlike anthem. Other than that, this isn't going to be very many people's favorite boss. Who thought taking one of the worst enemies in Souls games and making 30 of them run out at the same time was a good idea for a boss? Number 34, Royal Rat Authority. A lot of people don't like this fight right off the bat because they look at it as knockoff Sif plus rat toxic bullshit. It's hard to totally disagree. Another boss that isn't likely to have a lot of fans. He does once again have a badass soundtrack, so that's something. He also does give you access to the Rat King Covenant. Outside of that, not much to look at here. Number 33, Demon of Song. I'm not gonna lie, even with my rankings criteria, I had a hard time deciding whether Demon of Song is a good boss or not. He's definitely unique, I'll give him that. I don't know where in the design process you fall on a humanoid skull face covered in frog armor, but it's definitely memorable. I actually find the aesthetic pretty cool, as I love the mystical nature of the shrine in general, although I know not everyone enjoys its general gameplay. Speaking of gameplay mechanics, here's some evidence that being cocky generally doesn't pay off, so this happened. Unless you do this, most of the Demon of Song's moveset is pretty avoidable, although unique. According to his Souls description, when this demon developed a taste for human flesh, it was contained within the Shrine of Amana, but the line of priestesses who looked after the shrine and appeased the creature have died off. Not the most groundbreaking boss, but definitely memorable. Number 32, Sarah the Old Explorer, Ancient Soldier Varg, and the Afflicted Grave Robber. Maybe it's just because I've been going through a PvP phase lately, or there's a Havel monster which is awesome, but I actually don't dislike this boss as much as most people. Normally, I don't believe in chucking a bunch of random characters in a room and putting some health bars at the bottom constitutes a good boss, but for some reason I don't mind this. I think I just really like the idea of some old explorers and warriors lost deep within an ancient city on an adventure. I think the whole thing sounds pretty freaking cool. I actually do like the layout of the arena, but overall this fight doesn't need much delving into. I feel like a lot of people are going to disagree with this ranking. Number 31. Ancient Dragon. The idea of a giant ancient dragon is awesome in theory, but in practice, this dragon's arena just consists of a giant platform, his moveset is pretty limited, and it's really just a battle of attrition. The dragon does drop the Ashen Mist Heart, which allows access into the memories, but the dragon's origins are pretty unknown, which I guess does make sense for an ancient mythical creature. Also, here's me doing this for some unexplainable reason. I must have been daydreaming about Elden Ring coming out someday. Number 30, Mitha the Baneful Queen. I'll willingly admit, the first time I played Dark Souls 2, I didn't know you could drain the poison pool by setting the windmill on fire, but doing so makes this fight just a series of simple dodges due to Mitha's very limited moveset and really slow resets. She gives you an eternity of time to decide on your next move. The soundtrack suits her, but doesn't necessarily stand out either. The Divine Serpent Medusa vibe is pretty cool though, but the gameplay, like I said, is lackluster and doesn't do her justice. The one area that saves her is her solid lore. According to her bent blade, Mitha was the fairest queen in the land until something unhinged her. Was it the poison found deep within the earth, or the passion that consumed her heart? If you remember previously, the Covidous Demon had a thing for Mitha, but Mitha was wed to the prince of that nearby castle, as noted by Laddersmith Gilligan. But in return, he had feelings for another, meaning the prince. There seems to be some debate about who exactly this prince is, but either way, it seems like some awkward love triangle from every angle. Number 29, the Rotten. The Rotten is an interesting one. I'll be really interested to see where you guys would rank him. I honestly couldn't decide once again if he was a good boss, a bad boss, or just kinda there, which I feel like is a recurring theme in this game. The hollow on the top left of his shoulder seemingly puppeteers his movements, which is pretty funny. There seems to be some theory involving Gravelord Nito's soul and the Rotten's soul, but I couldn't find anything concrete about this. The Rotten's soul simply states, "The Rotten embraces all in his sanctuary, for all things rotten are tossed away." So, not the most enlightening thing I've ever read, The fight, from a gameplay mechanic standpoint, is pretty simple. You're basically just dodging some mostly telegraphed attacks from a mostly immobile enemy while avoiding the pits of fire throughout the arena. This fire-soaked arena is pretty underrated to me, as I think it's kind of cool, and also his soundtrack suits the battle pretty well. Number 28, Guardian Dragon. Maybe it's just because his arena looks like a giant sick treehouse that I would have loved as a kid, but I actually don't hate this boss. I think many of you probably would have ranked him lower than this, and don't get me wrong, the actual gameplay mechanics aren't great, especially for a melee build, as the dragon spends a lot of time out of range. The fight isn't anything to get out of bed for, but I do enjoy the setting. It is thought that Aldia commanded the dragon to stay in this room and guard the path to Dragon Ere as an experiment. Most interestingly, his soul mentions, do the dragons watch over the land of their own will, or are they in the grip of one of Aldia's spells? As much as I like the setting, I'm not sure how necessary this boss's inclusion was, to be honest. Number 27, Old Dragon Slayer. It's hard to imagine now as it's been so long, but I'm pretty certain many of us probably screeched a little bit when we entered the Cathedral of the Blue, only to see Ornstein staring back at us. Although it's unknown whether this is actually Ornstein or simply someone wearing Ornstein's armor or just influenced by him in general. Either way, the excitement unfortunately didn't last long, as it quickly becomes apparent that this fight's mechanics don't touch anywhere near the legendary encounter in Anor Londo. Aesthetically, the Ornstein armor still looks awesome, especially with a bit of a darker tinge to it, perhaps indicating it being well worn. This fight actually has a badass soundtrack if you listen to it on its own. Actually, a funny note, as I mentioned earlier in Dark Souls 2, is many of the soundtracks of the lesser bosses are some of the best soundtracks in the game. Old Dragon Slayer does use dark attacks rather than lightning, and the soul description says, the Old Dragon Slayer is reminiscent of a certain knight that appears in old legends. A fun encounter, I suppose, but honestly, it feels like a fight that's included for the sake of it, and perhaps could have taken a more creative route. Number 26, Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. This is another boss I don't particularly dislike as much as most people, but in fairness, I do wonder why its inclusion is necessary, especially considering it's followed by two more fights with much more meaning. I can't help but think the game wouldn't be missing anything if these two weren't here. I know this is a hot topic, but in making this list, I believe Dark Souls 2 probably could have been streamlined without a handful of these bosses. However, that's a debate for another time, as this video is to rank the bosses that are in the game. Aside from me questioning their meaning, I actually do like the battle. I find the fight fairly fun, having to find the right timing to dodge in and out while two opponents are trying to hit you. I do appreciate the arguments, however, that some obstacles should have been included in the arena, a la the famous Ornstein and Smo encounter where you could use the pillars to block off one or the other. You will have to show a level of judgment in chipping away at each of them, as if you kill one too soon, they will attempt to resurrect one another. Again, not inherently a terrible fight, I just question the importance to an endgame stretch of the story. Number 25, Old Iron King. The Old Iron King is the final boss of Iron Keep, whose arena is quite interesting as, in my opinion, it looks badass when you include his grand entrance through the lava. But gameplay-wise, the arena is terrible, as this fight is basically the Dark Souls 2 version of Ceaseless Discharge. You basically just wait for his super telegraphed attacks and spam attack his arm. While the aesthetic is more opinion-based, I actually think he looks pretty imposing and cool. It's just that the simplified gameplay makes him easy to write off. In general, making these lists, it's very difficult to not let one aspect of the boss cloud judging other areas. For example, as I've mentioned a couple times now, many of the bosses with bad gameplay actually have some of the best soundtracks in the game when you listen to them on their own. The Old Iron King obviously has huge lore implications, which accounts for his placement this high despite the subpar combat. It is known that Sir Alana was an associate of the Old Iron King and helped him forge his kingdom, as the Alana Knights you find in the Iron Keep were named so in his honor. The Old Iron King, after gaining the ability to control metal, built this kingdom so grand that it began to succumb to the flames and swallowed his castle as mentioned in the soul description. There is more to the Old Iron King, but you'll hear more about that in the subsequent boss entries. Number 24, the Lost Sinner. According to our friend Sweet Chalquois, the Lost Sinner attempted to light the first flame. It's not confirmed, but this may be the reason for her self-punishment. As mentioned in her item description, the Lost Sinner eternally punishes herself for the sins of her past. This can actually be a quite difficult early to mid-game fight for newer players, and the Lost Sinner doesn't leave a lot of time in between her attacks. Not to mention, in watching this back, the Lost Sinner has some filthy roll-catching ability. As true with a lot of Dark Souls 2 soundtracks, this one isn't tremendously memorable, but it does fit the atmosphere pretty well. Similarly, the Lost Sinner aesthetically doesn't blow you away, but she does suit what her character is supposed to be. The Lost Sinner is a very solid boss, and conquering her will most likely earn you your first primal bonfire. Number 23, the Skeleton Lords. I'm generally not a fan of collective bosses, but there's something funny about a bunch of random skeletons running around an arena. Plus, the arena is relatively unique for Dark Souls 2. The soundtrack isn't particularly memorable, but it suits the battle. I feel like this is a recurring theme in this game. Anyway, the Skeleton Lords were part of a crew that was supposed to track down the undead as stated by the soul description. The Old Iron King commanded the capture of all undead, but those charged with the task were overcome by the curse. This boss takes a decent amount of work to get to, and the outside of the arena looks as though some badass creature may be inside, so the random collection of enemies is a bit of a letdown. There are worse bosses in the game, but this probably isn't FromSoftware's best effort, and I'm surprised myself it's this high on the list. Number 22, Lud and Zolin, the King's Pets. I know boss runbacks are often a hotly contested topic, but this has gotta be the single worst boss run in any Souls game. Not to mention, Lud and Zolin are a highly difficult boss, so unless you're really good or using multiple summons, it's very likely you'll make this run multiple times. Surely one of the worst areas in a Souls game. Okay, ranting aside, the fight is a pretty intense challenge built on the Ava fight earlier in Elium Lois. The oversized tigers aren't particularly unbearable on their own, but if you don't kill Lud before Zolin joins, you may be in for a tough time. Even so, you may be in for pain once Zolin goes beast mode and starts healing himself. Or herself, I need to check that. Anyway, I can't explain in words how relieved I was to not have to make this run back again after conquering these beasts. This is another boss that I honestly had a tough time placing, mostly due to the run back was kept nagging on my mind, so I'm going to be really curious to see where you guys would have ranked them on the list. Interestingly, their soul descriptions say they each had the duty to fulfill the mercy killing of exiles. I gotta tell you, making that run back didn't feel merciful. Number 21, the Duke's Dear Freya. The Duke's Dear Freya, as the name implies, was probably the pet of Duke Tesladora, who had an affinity for spiders. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this isn't my favorite fight, probably because I'm freaked out by bugs in general, and specifically spiders. This fight is very unique, however, in the context of Dark Souls 2, as you can attack the head on either side of Freya, likely the one not shooting magic at you at the time. Maybe it was my OP fire katana, but I swear this fight used to be more difficult, although the run up to Freya is as much of a pain as I remembered. If you think spiders are cool, I can see why you like this fight, but personally, I ranked Freya about in the middle of all 5 categories, once again being aesthetic, arena, audio, lore, and gameplay. Nothing that blew me away, but a solid enough mid-game entry. Number 20, Flexile Sentry. Okay, I'm thinking this is probably way higher than most people would have ranked the Flexile Sentry, so I plan on hearing some shit about this one. but I absolutely love this arena, which makes up much of the score. The idea of a haunted looking ship pulling in through the fog and then doing battle below deck is completely badass to me. Maybe I'm in the minority, but I actually love the entire atmosphere of No Man's Wharf. Maybe it's just my love of pirates in general. I also think his double-sided design is super cool. I may be drawing a blank, but I can't really think of an enemy that looks similar to this in the entire Souls series. Plus, I love the eerily haunting overtunes that hum in the background, suiting this fight perfectly. The Flexile Sentry's soul description says, "The Flexile Sentry is a merciless creature whose purpose is to punish the undead." So, not extremely detailed in the lore department, but a badass early game fight nonetheless. Most people take out the Flexile Sentry fast enough that you won't notice, but the water level actually does rise, slowing your movement if the fight continues to a decent length of time. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get some shit in the comments about the placement of this boss, but I really like the fight. Number 19, King Vendrick. King Vendrick is obviously going to score very highly in lore, being that he's one of the main characters of Dark Souls 2. Again, I don't claim to be a lore expert, but I'm going to try to get this close. Drangleic once was a prosperous kingdom led by Vendrick and his brother Lord Aldia. One day, King Vendrick met a stunningly beautiful woman named Nashandra, who he made his queen. Nashandra convinced Vendrick to invade the giants and steal a powerful item, which Vendrick did and in turn used to create the golems, which were used to build the mighty Drangleic castle. Eventually, the giants came seeking vengeance, and Vendrick figured out Nashandra's true identity, as she's a small fragment severed from Manus, father of the Abyss. At least that's the short of it, which I will fill in more of these blanks in Nashandra's entry. Overall, Vendrick really is just a fight of attrition in that he has a very large health pool and he hits like a truck, but his moveset is pretty limited as he's just a hollow of the king he once was, sealed deep in the undead crypt hidden behind Velstad at this point. Just make sure you have some souls of a giant with you, otherwise this fight will take a very long time. Number 18, Scorpioness Najka. Reminiscent of Chaos Witch Quelaag in Dark Souls 1, Scorpioness Najka is half humanoid, half bug, in this case a scorpion obviously. This fight is pretty unique in the context of Dark Souls 2. She can actually be a fairly tricky challenge for this point in the game due to her fairly wide range of awkward attacks. Her soundtrack isn't particularly memorable, but it may be better than you recall upon another listen. Scorpioness Najka once lived peacefully with her partner, Man Scorpion Tark, who can be found in the Shaded Woods and summoned for this boss fight. Tark mentions his master lost his mind because of his research, and it is implied this could be Seath the Scaleless, although this isn't confirmed. It is also thought that Duke Tesladora may have been his creator, similar to the Duke's dear Freya. Overall, this is a solid, yet not a light shed encounter. Number 17, Alana the Squalid Queen. Alana is located on the bottom floor of the Dragon's Sanctum and sports a pretty sweet arena given the massive dragon sculpture on the back wall. I'm not gonna lie, her actual aesthetic is pretty downright creepy, but yet so is this entire encounter. Although I will say the gold summons she brings into existence are a nice touch. Between these summons, her ability to cast dark magic as well as teleport, she can be fairly tricky even being so over-leveled at this point in the game. It is actually quite terrifying and badass when Alana summons a massive golden version of Velstad, who relentlessly charges you down. Similar to Nashandra, Alana was also a fragment of Manus, father of the Abyss, and she represents wrath. According to her soul item, this child of dark accompanies the dragon, slowly amassing souls in anticipation of the coming day of vengeance. Perhaps in reference to the conquering of Sholva by Sir Jorg, who defeated the Sunken King and awakened Sin, who in turn covered Sholva in a toxic cloud. Overall, a pretty damn good boss. Number 16, Nashandra. Nashandra scores highly on this list, less because of the actual battle, and more because of her meaning to the story and the downright beautiful yet powerful track that accompanies her encounter. One of the easiest final boss encounters in the Souls... well, shit. Anyways, moving on. Once you get close to Nashandra, she's pretty easy to strike multiple times without retaliation. She uses a range of dark attacks and can curse you, but none of them do any tremendously threatening damage at this point in the game. As mentioned in the Vendrick entry, Nashandra is a small fragment of Manus, father of the Abyss. Vendrick had created a number of obstacles in order to stop Nashandra's attempt to ascend the Throne of Want, these of which Nashandra persuades the player to unlock for her as the game continues, specifically suggesting the bearer of the curse head to the undead crypt and end the Hallowed Vendrick, as well as directing you to the memories of the giants. According to her soul item, Nashandra was born of the dark with an insatiable lust for strength. While the fight itself isn't great from a gameplay perspective, Nashandra represents a key part of the Dark Souls 2 story. Number 15, Giant Lord. This placement is going to be way too high on the list for most people, I get that, but I genuinely love the memories and would love to see them brought back in some way. I think they are a super cool inclusion, and the cinematic nature leading up to the Giant Lord battle as you see him in the distance is encapsulating for me. Yes, the fight is a bit of a cluster stuffed in the corner, but the whole sequence feels so grand to me. The giant seizing the fortress and fighting as you approach, along with the fireballs coming from the sea, the tumbling statue, and the Giant Lord waiting in the distance. I'll admit the fight itself is awkward due to the camera and the size differential of the player and the Giant Lord himself. It's not for everyone, but I just love this whole event. As mentioned in the Giant Lord's soul description, the giants landed on the northern shores and set siege to King Vendrick's castle to claim an invaluable prize. Further, the giant's kinship says, each king has a rightful throne, and when he sits upon it, he sees what he chooses to see. Or perhaps it is the throne which shows the king only what he wants. The flames roar, but will soon begin to fade, and only a worthy heir might burnish their light. What is it truly a claimant of the throne could desire? This is the same item, of course, that unlocks your battle with Nashandra. Between the cinematic and the lore, damn it, I'm keeping the Giant Lord this high on the list. Number 14, Ava the King's Pet. What a fight this magnificent beast is. Ava, alongside Lud, Zolin, and 4 other beasts, served the Ivory King, fulfilling specific duties, with Ava's, according to her soul description, being the guardianship of the king's beloved child of dark. The arena on the grand statue-clad bridge with the snow coming through, castle in the background is something to behold, and as I said, Ava is pretty damn cool looking boss. What's cooler than a giant white tiger with magical powers? Her soundtrack isn't totally memorable, but suits the occasion. I noticed many of the Dark Souls 2 themes don't particularly stand out from memory, but when you listen back to them, they're actually quite good. The mechanics of this fight aren't anything you haven't seen before in a giant beast encounter, but overall, I can't have too many complaints about this entry, as Ava is a great boss. Number 13, Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin. Aldia has to score number 1 in lore, with the definitive version of Dark Souls 2 literally carrying his name, Scholar of the First Sin. Aldia, as mentioned previously, is King Vendrick's older brother and helped him in founding the Kingdom of Drangleic. As mentioned in the malformed shell item description, the peculiar figure known as Lord Aldia attempted to uncover the secrets of life itself and viewed the undead as a key to this mystery. Further, in the Spitfire Spear item description, the mysterious Lord Aldia secluded himself inside a manor to conduct various experiments. Those invited to the manor disappeared, replaced over time with malformed beasts that roamed its halls. Aldia held such an interest in the undead, which caused division between him and Vendrick, even resulting in Vendrick banishing Aldia to his keep. Eventually, Aldia failed in the aforementioned experiments in search of the nature of the undead curse and turned into the monstrosity we see inhabiting bonfires. Again, I don't claim to be a lore expert, but hopefully I got that pretty close. Anyways, fight-wise, Aldia certainly displays a unique array of pyromancy and physical attacks with his vines. However, his obvious immobility makes him quite easy to damage. He does, however, have a very moving piano piece, which is very appropriate for the ending of a Souls game. While the fight doesn't have the most memorable combat, his involvement in many layers of the story warrants him a decent spot on this list. Number 12, Blue Smelter Demon. I don't know what to make of Blue Smelter Demon, because on one hand, he's a great boss fight, but on the other, he's a reskin and also has one of the worst run-ups in FromSoft history. I would imagine he's ranked way higher on this list than most people would like, but the problem is he has virtually the same aesthetic, soundtrack, and gameplay as the regular Smelter Demon, so it's hard to rank him too drastically different. If I wasn't adhering to a specific formula, I would honestly probably rank him way lower due to him just being a repeat boss. The fight is still fun, it's just that we've seen it before. He's included in Scholar of the First Sin, but it feels weird having people pay extra for a DLC and having one of the bosses be a reskin. Anyways, his blue fiery glow does look pretty sick. I just don't know that changing a color and vaguely altering the moveset constitutes a new boss. I'll fill in more Smelter Demon details in the OG entry later on. Number 11, Executioner's Chariot. I'm finding myself complaining a lot about fog door runs in this game, but man, you better beat the Executioner's Chariot in your first try, because subsequent runs are definitely rage-inducing. That aside, this is one of the more creative bosses FromSoftware has ever made, and a pretty enjoyable change of pace. The runaway imbued horses are certainly something to see, and they score highly due to their cool aesthetic and unique arena. This is a really fun fight and a nice twist on a boss. While once you learn the location of the hexers and how to get out of the way of the chariot, this fight isn't particularly difficult, but it still is a lot of fun each time. They might be ranked a little higher than most people would like to see, but I put a lot of stock in how memorable a boss is, and they're one of the highlights of the game to me. Lore-wise, the Executioner's Chariot's simple purpose really is to just torment and punish the undead during hunts, organized by old Iron King, as corroborated by their soul item description. Pretty funny. And now we come to the top 10 with the Rune Sentinels. I'm personally a big fan of the Rune Sentinels. They aren't beings per se, rather suits of armor, similar to the Dragon Slayer armor boss in Dark Souls 3. The Rune Sentinel has no corporeal form. It is only an empty soul that haunts the armor, as noted by their soul description. They are a fantastic early game boss as they teach the player how to deal with multiple enemies in a way that isn't completely overwhelming. The design of their armor is pretty slick if I do say so, and their soundtrack has a nice tempo and is one of the more memorable in the game. It's actually the same soundtrack that the Smelter Demons use. Their lore doesn't run tremendously deep, but it is thought that they were part of the Drangleic royal army. Where this fight excels is the balancing of the combat. While experienced players will burn through this fight, it's easy to forget facing multiple enemies is a tough task for a Souls newcomer. The platform is an obvious tool in teaching the player to separate your opponents. Overall, the Rune Sentinels are an excellent and memorable mid-tier boss. Number 9, Smelter Demon. Maybe it's just me, but I find Smelter Demon to be a fairly underrated boss. Being a giant flaming beast, I think his design is pretty badass. His soundtrack, which he shares with the Rune Sentinels, is pretty memorable, and so is his arena. He sports a wide variety of attacks with his sword, which he buffs with fire during the fight. He hits very hard, but leaves more than enough windows to allow the player to dodge and attack. His soul description reads, soul of the Smelter Demon that haunts the castle that sunk into a pool of iron. The old Iron King's life was taken by a mass of iron that had been given a soul. Was this metal Goliath there from the beginning, or was it a product of the king's conceit? It is thought that once the old Iron King gained power to bring life to iron, he likely created the Smelter Demon as his puppet. Although the run-up sees an even more comical amount of Alana Knights than I recalled run out, the fight itself is excellent. Also, seriously, how funny are the Alana Knights running animation? Come on, it's hilarious. Number 8. Velstad, the Royal Aegis. Having played a ton of the Demon Souls remake recently, I couldn't help but notice the aesthetic similarity between Velstad and Garl Vinland. I couldn't find anything definitive lore-wise on this, but they do look like they could definitely be part of the same hypothetical army, probably just some reused inspiration. Either way, Velstad scored highest in aesthetics as he looks sick as hell with his weapon and armor, especially once he starts mixing in dark spells. It seems pretty split whether people think this fight is tough or not. The mechanics are pretty sound, but some people find the fight easy, saying that many enemies leading up to Velstad have very similar movesets, while some have a tough time due to the sheer damage Velstad can inflict. Velstad is buried behind one of Dark Souls 2's most brutal boss run-ups with the Hallway of Death. A funny video could be the worst boss run-ups in the Souls series, although it would require a ton of gameplay for a small amount of footage. Anyways, the arena is excellent for what it's supposed to be, especially containing the secret you'll find upon conquering this boss. As you'll see in the soul description and the subsequent room, Velstad was always at the king's side, as if he were his lord's own shadow. After the king retired to the undead crypt, Velstad followed, never to return. There is another interesting note on Velstad's lore, but you will see that in a following boss, which I'm sure many of you can guess who that is. Number 7. The Pursuer. The Pursuer has a bit of an unknown background, but it's part of what creates his cool mystique. His aesthetic ranks highly as his blacked out armor looks sick, along with the array of weapons you could see hanging off his back, his giant shield, and glowing red laser eyes in his helm, perhaps indicating laser focus on his target. The idea of a tracking hitman in a Souls game is pretty awesome and definitely reminds me of Combustion Man in The Last Airbender. Back on topic, although the Pursuer's attacks are fairly telegraphed, his massive shield can present a problem and he can hit like a truck at this point in the game. The arena is unique, overlooking a beautiful Majula seaside and contains the ballistas, which solo takes more precision and timing than I recall. It actually took me a few tries to pull this off, but when I did, it felt pretty awesome. On top of that, the Pursuer has an awesome Battle March anthem that really does sound like the theme of a hitman pursuing a target. FromSoftware nailed this boss, definitely one of their most memorable. Number 6. Dark Lurker. When I originally finished this boss, I remember thinking, holy crap, that was about as good of a boss fight from a gameplay standpoint as you could make. It's unlikely you'll find Dark Lurker on a blind playthrough, but once you find out about him, it's more than worth the effort to do his questline on subsequent playthroughs. A casting fight can be really difficult for a developer to balance properly, but FromSoftware nailed this one. The barrage of attacks, especially once Dark Lurker duplicates, made the action non-stop, but not to the point where it felt spammy, which is where the balance was hit perfectly. The haunting track and chasm of an arena does Dark Lurker justice as well. The actual lore of Dark Lurker is somewhat shrouded, but this, in a way, suits his character perfectly. I mean, how much are you supposed to know about a character buried so deeply into the game? His soul description simply states, "The dark chasm of old is the remnant of some ancient, dissipated being." I love the idea that the Dark Lurker is somehow linked to Manus and the same abyss from Dark Souls 1, but that seems quite unsubstantiated in a major way. Anyhow, the gameplay balance, Dark Lurker's cool aesthetic, arena, and soundtrack make him more than deserving of his spot on the list. Number 4. Sin the Slumbering Dragon. I love the idea of an Atlantis-like lost civilization, so this entire DLC was right down my alley. The encounters with Sin throughout the level before reaching his fight are an obvious nod to Calamite from Dark Souls 1. Luckily, this fight is much less akin to the Ancient and Guardian dragons, and much more akin to the aforementioned Calamite fight. His vast cavernous arena lying deep within Shulva, the Sanctum City, is certainly appropriate for the grand occasion. As well, the heroic soundtrack playing gives the fight a grand feel. Sin mixes in a nice array of ranged and melee attacks, including his signature fiery poison, certainly some of the coolest and most unique attacks in the game. Boss fights with dragons or large flying creatures are often unbalanced due to them spending too much time out of range, such as the Guardian Dragon fight, but Sin is attuned extremely well. His patterns and flights make sense for the Grand Beast. Sin would probably be a more difficult contest, but due to how far into the game he is, you'll probably be leveled up enough and have enough healing items to tank through and heal whatever he hits you with. To make this contest more difficult, you'll probably need to impose some sort of healing limits on yourself. However, this is more of a general Dark Souls 2 issue and less specific to Sin. According to his soul description, the king erected a magnificent city and the dragon slept soundly, until Sir Jorg disturbed it with a single great strike, and the dragon could bear its store of poison no longer. The reign of death toppled the city, but restored the dragon's purity. An epic encounter and grand contest indeed. Number 4. Fume Knight. Certainly one of the most badass fights in Dark Souls 2. What's cooler than a knight in blacked out armor dual wielding a Fume Ultra Greatsword and a Fume Straightsword? The knight's name is Rame or Rhyme, not sure to be honest, but according to his soul description, Rame was a distinguished knight who became infatuated with the Bride of Ash and settled in this land of smoke and fog. In fact, Rame, along with Velstad, was one of the king's most trusted figures until he clashed with and was defeated by Velstad, as corroborated by the rebels' great shield and Rame's helm. Actually, if you wear Velstad's armor into the arena, Fume Knight will immediately buff the greatsword and go for a heavy attack. Also, don't ask me why I'm buffing with charcoal pine resin for an enemy who would clearly be resistant to fire. Anyhow, Fume Knight presents an awesome fight, as his aforementioned dual wielding gives him a large array of attacks on top of some pyromancy spells. I have no idea where this statistic is pulled from, but according to Fume Knight's fandom page, he has a 93% failure rate, making him the hardest boss in the game. Number 3. Burnt Ivory King. The Burnt Ivory King is less an individual battle and more a full-scale war, as the first half of this fight is spent brawling waves of charred Lois Knights alongside your 3 uncorrupted friends who you've met throughout Eliam Lois. By the way, even if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, I love the name Eliam Lois. It sounds majestic and magical, especially in a snow-covered land. Dark Souls 2 has a number of awesome bosses, of which I had a lot of trouble coming up with a clear-cut number 1. I could easily see many of you telling me Burnt Ivory King is the best of them. Anyways, this fight sports one of the coolest arenas in any FromSoftware game. The drop down into the depths of hell, deep below the snow-covered surface, the lore that goes with it, and the grand battle that pursues. It just had to be my number 1 arena. The Burnt Ivory King has a really badass spin on the traditional knight armor found throughout the game, the soundtrack matches the setting well, and he sports a sweet moveset mechanically, being powerful but fair, sometimes imbuing his sword with magic. I'm not a lore expert by any means, but from what I understand, the flames of chaos surrounding this battle beneath Eliam Lois are the same flames originally created by the Witch of Izolith's attempt to recreate the first flame with the Lord Soul. No idea if that's true, but it sounded really good when I read it. According to his soul description, the proud Ivory King was ever merciful and devoted himself to the protection of his great land until he was devoured by the flames of chaos. So the burnt Ivory King was quite the heroic figure, and this excellent fight does him justice. Number 2, Looking Glass Knight. So, when you begin this epic battle, come on, not again. This epic contest just has so much going for it. The setting feels grand, high upon Drangleic Castle, rain pouring down, gloomy yet heroic music, and mountaintops peeking over the backdrop. Looking Glass Knight looks cool as can be in his plated metal armor and massive glass shield, possibly one of the most unique shields in the entire Souls series. In retrospect, I'm not sure how this charcoal pine resin is working in the rain, but nonetheless, this fight is spectacular. I was playing online, but unfortunately did not get a player summon through the shield, as is possible. On a side note, more people are still playing Dark Souls 2 than you would think. I was able to get a handful of PvP fights in on my journey. Anyways, back to the Looking Glass Knight. According to his soul description, he challenges visitors to the Lordless Castle. Long ago, the King's Passage was a route taken by the bravest warriors to prove themselves, but now it only prevents one from pursuing the runaway king. I'll be curious to see where you guys would rank him, but easily one of my favorite fights in the entire Souls series. Number 1, Sir Alana. Maybe I'm just blinded by my love of the samurai, but for me, Sir Alana is the best boss in Dark Souls 2. I don't particularly think Sir Alana is a clear-cut number 1. I could easily see arguments for others, but someone has to take the top spot on the list, and for me, it's Sir Alana. Sir Alana resides in the memory of the old Iron King, meditating, clearing his mind for battle upon the gorgeous marbled floor, eerie yet telling sunset in the back, an epic soundtrack with a touch of finality playing. Sir Alana sports a traditional Eastern armor, yet of his own uniqueness. According to the soul of Sir Alana, he came from an Eastern land and became the king's most trusted knight. Further evidenced by the bewitched Alana sword, when he departed, the old Iron King bequeathed Sir Alana's name to his Iron warriors. Sir Alana will present a unique death animation and commit seppuku if you take no damage in the fight. Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of skill in Dark Souls 2. This fight requires pinpoint precision and timing, as Sir Alana keeps a ton of pressure on you, giving very small windows to make your move. As mentioned, I could easily see people putting someone else as the top boss, but for me, I think it's the intricate sword fighting mechanics that put Sir Alana over the top and make him number 1 on my list. Well, the sheer amount of bosses of different types and variety certainly made this the most challenging list I've made to date. I have a feeling if everyone made their own best Dark Souls 2 boss rankings list, they would probably come out much more all over the place than Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne lists would. I think that this list will probably conjure up quite a bit of debate and disagreement, but feel free to let me know which bosses you thought were misplaced and which were pretty close. I know everyone says it, but I really do read and respond to every comment. Again, I can't believe how lucky I am to have such positive and nice viewers, so even if you disagree, please continue to try to keep it friendly. Next up is likely going to be Dark Souls 3. I do work a full-time job, so it's probably going to take me a couple weeks to replay through Dark Souls 3, record the footage, and make the video. Also, if anyone is interested, I'm going to start posting more playthroughs and maybe some streams on a regular basis, so check out the channel I'll be doing that on in the description if you're interested. Anyways, here's to hoping some Elden Ring news comes out soon. Until next time, this has been Ghost Riposte. Have an awesome day, everyone.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.